It's great to be here. I was just saying to Maya, Tokyo has become a little bit milder, which is wonderful. Hopefully, it'll stay like this, but not as mild, and it's certainly not as hot as the politics of the Pacific Islands over the past 5 or 6 months. And this is the topic of tonight's Indo-Pacific, or the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific with Japan experts, is looking at great power politics in the Indo-Pacific and how it relates to the Pacific Islands. And some good places to start here is to look at what are the needs of the Pacific Islands and how they particularly fit within the broader free and open Indo-Pacific concept. So I'd like to start there, and then next I'd like to prioritize why, or introduce why I think the Pacific Islands have become one of the pivot points for competition within the region. And here I'm going to focus on sea lines of communication, but also maritime resources that are located there. And this is an important area to discuss. And then lastly, what are the prospects for the region in general? Are we going to see a massive amount of investment? Are we going to see a continued uh, underinvestment within the region? Are we going to see more of or something else? And I think that's an important area to start with. So let's think about the Pacific Islands, first of all, from the standpoint of the Pacific Islands. What's important for these countries, and how are these countries going to um, how are they thinking about their own region and the Indo-Pacific um, at large? And this is really easy. In fact, they're thinking about climate change, and they're thinking about climate change, and they're thinking about the existence of their state. Climate change is real. What we see is sea levels are increasing. The severity of storms are increasing, and it is affecting the prosperity and viability of the Pacific Island states. Perhaps within our lifetime, some of the states that exist there, and here perhaps Dr. Busato or Ambassador Dr. Busato can shed some light here, the nature of the Pacific Islands and the challenges that they face. Aside from the existential threat of climate change that all of them are facing, or most of them are facing, I think it's also important for us to be thinking about the development side of where the Pacific Islands are and where they want to be. And here again, I think that we can think about their predicament or what they want from the standpoint of development or underdevelopment, from the standpoint that they feel somewhat like they are mistreated colonial subjects by some of the countries within the region. And as a result, they have decided to pursue a more strategically autonomous course moving forward to try and get resources from outside players. And in this case, we're talking about China. And this is why we've seen China over the past year, but in particular since March, really reach out to the islands and try to provide some substantial resources through the Belt Road Initiative, but also through potential security pacts to provide some resources to the Solomon Islands in particular. But again, thinking about this in terms um, of how they can improve their situation. Now, we don't know if the Solomon Islands and the other countries are negotiating, their engagement with China is a negotiating strategy, or if it's a sincere engagement, or a mixture of the two. But I think that's a really important starting point for us to be thinking about the Pacific Islands. Again, this idea of and the existential threat they face from climate change, the developmental challenges that they face, and I think in many ways geopolitical obscurity that are seen as a useful tool for the competition for recognition by Taiwan and China. They're seen as sometimes a useful tool by Australia or the United States for various issues, but by and large, they feel marginalized and underrepresented, and that their issues are not represented in the United Nations or in the international community. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, why are the Pacific Islands becoming an important point for competition between China and the United States? And here there's really two or three different reasons. We've talked about sea lines of communication as important routes to transport goods in and out of the region. That continues to be a key aspect of the Pacific Island nations, where they will represent future sea lanes of communication that traverse the Pacific Ocean. Important telecommunication underwater cables go through much of that region as well. And here, this is a geopolitical area of challenge or concern in that if these cables were cut, it would create challenges for communication and other issues. But I also think that what we call the maritime resources and the exclusive economic zones associated with the maritime territories of these states are particularly important for emerging countries like China and their massive need to get maritime resources. And I'm talking about fishery resources, but also potential natural resources and energy resources that can be mined from these particular areas. So this is a real critical area. And when we look at the map of the Pacific Islands and we think about the maritime exclusive zones that exist and make up the large amount of territory, it's really, really significant. And a country that can make headways or can make strong relations with these countries can potentially exploit these resources or have monopoly on these resources, which would create challenges for the global community. So sea lines of communication, maritime resources are really, really important. And then lastly, I think importantly, the diplomatic position that these islands face, in particular with regards to the recognition of Taiwan or of China as being the real representative of China, is also an important area that we can be talking about. And here again, Ambassador Bosato may want to provide some feedback here. So thinking about these areas, so we've talked about the Pacific Islands needs. We've talked about I guess, what great powers are interested in the particular region. And you probably noticed that I didn't say great powers are sincerely interested in development or sincerely interested in the prosperity of these countries. Rather, they looked at these countries through an interest-based approach. The last part, again, is where does they fit in within this Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific idea, and what is the prospects for this region moving forward? And when we think about where the Pacific Islands fit within the Indo-Pacific, I think that we can think about it through 3 or 4 different ways. First, again, going back to this idea of sea lines of communication that are managed by a set of rules that are agreed upon by like-minded countries. 2, those natural resources that I think will be increasingly important as countries develop, or sea lines of communication break down and countries need to secure natural resources in their backyard. 3, they play an important role in the normative construction of the region. And what that means is basically there's a lot of countries in the Pacific Islands, and if they buy into the free and open Indo-Pacific vision that was been laid out by many countries, then we're going to see broader consensus or critical mass of countries come together and try to shape the Indo-Pacific region along the lines of transparent rules-based behavior. Lastly, and I think importantly, whatever way we're thinking about the free and open Indo-Pacific, the reality is the Pacific Islands form the Pacific part of the free and open Indo-Pacific. It's very difficult to separate them. They play a role in terms of those natural resources. They play a role in terms of voting, but they're also important areas of competition that could create challenges moving forward. Back in May, Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, did offer a security pact with the Solomon Islands, and the security pact was not transparent, and it created many concerns within the region. What would be what would this mean for the regional balance of power? And I think we should be clear is that the Chinese are interested in expanding their influence within the region to enhance their case vis-a-vis Taiwan, to get access to resources, but also to mount a security presence in Australia and New Zealand's backyard as a disincentive for their cooperation with the United States. Now, following this visit, we have, of course, the Japanese and the United States and other countries come together for the purpose of providing some financial aid, and they did this through the so-called group of Pacific Blue Cooperation Group, where Japan, the United States, France, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries would provide some cooperative aid with. Hi, Fabrizio.
Oh, finally.
Yeah, you made
Hello.
it. Okay, I'll just
Good
finish my
evening.
comments.
Sure.
Just a second. And so this is really important for us to be thinking about China's position within the region, and they would like to enhance their security presence to disincentivize Australia and New Zealand to cooperate with the United States on issues pertaining to China. So the Pacific Islands is definitely going to be an area of extreme competition. It's an area of exploitation, and the Pacific Islands have an opportunity, depending on how they play this game, to get more resources from many players, and this resources could potentially enhance their own development. The question that I guess I'm left, and again, Dr. Bosato or Ambassador Bosato will probably elaborate, is what is the likelihood of a substantial improvement of their conditions in the islands with or without great power competition? And this is a real open question. Second is there really a role for the Pacific Islands in the free and open Indo-Pacific? And I think there is, but the reality is there buy-in within the Pacific Islands? And here again, I'll defer to Dr. Bosato because this is his area of experience. So I'll stop there with my 3 opening kind of framing concepts, and I'm happy to invite Dr. Bosato to share his views or anyone else.